laundering Nazi money, providing funds to the Nazis, and guess who the director of Union Banking Corporation was that was in charge of that? Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. Bush and the father of George Herbert Walker Bush. And in fact, in late 1942, halfway through World War II for America, he was actually prosecuted by the federal government of the United States under the Trading with the Enemies Act, stripped of his holdings in Union Banking Corporation and the American Hamburg Steamship Line, which, by the way, he sat on the board of directors along with Max Warburg. All right, and this, the American Hamburg Steamship Line, was the largest company that was bringing Nazi saboteurs, propaganda, and money into the United States. So he was stripped of his holdings and fined a few $1 million and basically slapped on the wrist. And but nothing much was said about that. Why was that? Because in the summer of 1942, Prescott Bush, who might have been an evil, money-changing Nazi financier, but he was not stupid. And he undoubtedly knew that they were looking into his business dealings. So what did he do? He was instrumental in founding the United Service Organization, the USO. And for some of you older folks who might still remember World War II, the USO was just beloved by all of the servicemen because that's where you went to get a little taste of home. That's where you went to meet girls who would serve you coffee. The USO club in Hollywood had the stars would come. I mean, it was a huge part of the civilian war effort. And just think about it. How could they possibly, in the middle of World War II, announce that the founder of the USO was actually a Nazi financier? You know, it would have been a propaganda disaster, so that's how Prescott Bush skated out from under all these charges. But so they had tremendous support in the United States. And here we can see the men in the companies behind Hitler. Of course, naturally you'd find I.G. Farben and Zeiss, Bosch, Daimler-Benz, Siemens, Krupp, Alliance AG, the giant insurance company, which is still the world's largest insurance company today. In fact, was part of the insurers of the World Trade Center. Okay. And their big claim to fame was that during World War II, they actually had insured the Nazi concentration camps against damage by the inmates who might want to tear down a fence or, you know, commit some dastardly deed. We also see that attorneys for the Nazi Schroeder Bank, another major principal funder from Hitler, was the New York law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, and the lawyers that were representing the Nazis were John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, who went on to become head of the CIA. So once Marxist socialism threatened to go worldwide, they created National Socialism in Germany to try to put a stop to it. But they created another Frankenstein monster, because when Hitler took over Germany in early 1933, Germany was on its knees financially. The money was in hyperinflation. You all remember the stories. They had to have a whole wheelbarrow load of money just to buy a loaf of bread. Half the population was out of work. They were in dire straits. Within 2 years, by 1935, Germany was booming. Why? Because Hitler started public works projects like the Autobahn and building buildings and all like that. And he did not borrow interest-bearing money from the international bankers. He created his own money through the Deutsche Bank, the Reich Bank, and interest-free money. And that's why they then decided, after creating Hitler and the Nazis, they decided they had to stop him. Winston Churchill laid it out when he said, "You must understand that this war is not against Hitler or National Socialism, but against the strength of the German people," meaning the economic strength of the German people, which must be smashed once and for all, regardless of whether it's in the hands of Hitler or a Jesuit priest. They didn't care who was in charge. They actually liked National Socialism, as we will see, But Germany was becoming too powerful, and the financial wizards in the City of London and in Wall Street did not want Germany leading the world economic order, so they had to pool the resources of 26 nations to stop Hitler. And now that leads us to the rise of the Fourth Reich, and that's another book I have. You might find that at your local bookstore. This is the Nazification of America. And it starts by debauching the money. You now have the Federal Reserve System, which is America's central bank. Early on, they said we must never refer to it as a central bank. And now, starting about 10, 15 years ago, all of a sudden in the news in the United States, they just said, the central bank today announced raising interest rates, blah, blah, blah. And they just started referring to it as the central bank. And we're so dumbed down, drugged out, we say, oh, the central bank, okay. Don't even know the history and the debates that have taken place about it. And what has this central bank done for us? Ben Bernanke, chairman of the Fed's Board of Governors, was asked about the Great Depression of the 1930s, and he said, well, yeah, you're right, we did it. We're really sorry. We're going to try to do better. So they have admitted that they engineered the Great Depression of the 30s. In 2009, when he was asked before a congressional committee what happened to $500 billion in U.S. tax-backed credit swaps to foreign banks, he says, I don't know. Gee, I had it when I came in. And then pressed on it, he said, well, I really can't tell you, because that's privileged information. Because the Federal Reserve System is neither federal nor does it have any reserves. It is a privately operated operation. The 12 Federal Reserve banks are owned by private banks, which in turn are owned by private investors, many of whom are not Americans. This is the international scope of the money, and if you'll check on your own Australian dollars, you'll find that it's probably the same situation. And yet it's been the Federal Reserve that has done the credit swaps, bailouts, promoted stimulus money, trade deficits. They sent several $1 trillion over to foreign banks, and when the Congress said, well, wait a minute, who got the money? What are they using it for? This is our money. This is tax money. And what kind of collateral did we get in exchange? And Bernanke says, oh, well, I can't tell you that. Folks, that's insane. Don't let that happen in Australia. Track your money. Find out where your tax money's going. If it's going to help the little old pensioner down the road, that's great. But if it's going offshore and they won't tell you where it's going, you got a problem. Now, in April 2009, at the G20 conference, G20 being the 20 nations that have signed up for this economic regulatory entity, they all signed on for the Financial Stability Board. Look that one up. The Financial Stability Board is supposed to regulate and coordinate all of the world's and the various nations' economies to make them all kind of come into line and operate in a similar fashion. It used to be called the Financial Stability Committee, and it was a branch of the Bank for International Settlements. Yes, that's right, the old Nazi-dominated bank. So now the Nazis are getting control over the money supply. Remember what Lenin said? The way to destroy the nation is debauch the money. The Financial Stability Board now governs the Federal Reserve Board, the Securities and Exchange Commission, Commodities Trading Commission, and several others. And under the new health care plan just passed in America, which is the most god-awful thing I've ever heard about, not that I'm opposed to health care, I think everyone deserves to have some minimal health care, but there's other ways of doing things. Early on, Barack Obama campaigned on the idea of single payer, something similar to what Britain does or Canada, okay? And yet, soon as they started seriously talking about health care, first thing he did was saying single payer, that's off the table. We're not even going to talk about that. What a scumbag. Typical politician. You know how you can tell if a politician's lying to you? His mouth's moving. Thomas Jefferson understood this. He said, and I sincerely believe with you that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies. And that's true. If you cut off the funds, the armies will go away. He also said that democracy will cease to exist when you take away from those who are willing to work and give to those who would not. And this has been proven true throughout history. Again, I'm not necessarily opposed to socialism. We have our own socialist programs in the United States, Medicare, okay, Social Security, and there are certain programs that need, there are certain things in every country that need to be socialized so that you take care of the poor, the destitute, the people. You know, even Jesus said the poor are always with us, and I assure you he was not just talking about people who didn't have anything in their pocketbook, okay? There's always somebody that needs a little help, and we need to see that they're taken care of, but not in the way that these international globalists are trying to make it work. Because throughout history, it has been shown that once you have a system where the people who are working then turn over money and give it to people who are not working, before long the people who are working go, wait a minute, I'm working my butt off. This guy is getting almost as much as I make, and he's not doing anything. I think I'll go on the dole too. And pretty soon, the numbers of people who are working shrink, and the numbers of people who are not working grow, and then you have a real problem, because how are you going to pay for all of that? So you have to find middle ground. So to America today, we're turning into a zombie nation. All right, how can I say that? Very easy. Zombie banks have been defined as banks whose liabilities outweigh their assets. They're dead. But they've gotten stimulus money, taxpayer-backed funds coming in to prop them up. So they're dead, they're bankrupt, but they're still going through the motions because they've got taxpayer money propping them up. Well, as a nation, America is broke. We owe, depending on who you want to listen to, between 12 and 15 trillion dollars. And trillion, the number trillion is really hard to contemplate. I don't know how many of you all have been to Texas, but it's a big place. The distance between the Louisiana-Texas border and El Paso on the extreme western border of Texas is the same distance between El Paso and Los Angeles. It's big. In Texas, there's something like 250,000 acres. 1 trillion acres would represent 3.7 million states the size of Texas. Think about that. It's hard to conceive of. You can't conceive of 1 trillion. And yet we're tossing around trillions of dollars in the newspaper all the time. Okay. So we owe between 12 and 15 trillion dollars. It's been estimated that every man, woman, and child in the United States was to divest every asset they have. They couldn't come up with more than 7 to 9 trillion dollars. So we're broke. But we don't know it. We keep printing money, and we just keep going through the motions. So we're a zombie nation. Just kind of going along. And after the National Socialism, I mean the neoconservatism of Bush and the corruption and the problems that was causing was beginning to wake people up. Well, then they shifted us in 2008 to the Marxist socialism of Barack Obama. Still socialism, and it's still the plan of the international financiers. To show you that there's been no change, 1989 to 1993, we had the administration of George Herbert Walker Bush, a Republican, and every cabinet member except for Dan Quayle, his vice president, who couldn't spell potato, and his old buddy Jim Baker, and Health and Human Services Secretary Louis Sullivan. Every other member was a member of the Secretive Council on Foreign Relations, which is the sister organization to the Royal Institute of International Affairs in Britain. This was formed right after World War I, when the League of Nations idea failed because the U.S. Senate said, we're not ready to give up our sovereignty, and they wouldn't sign on for it. So they created the Royal Institute of International Affairs in Britain and the Council on Foreign Relations in America for the express purpose of conditioning the public to accept a global governance. And today it's the United Nations, and this is what they are still pushing for. And they call themselves globalist. And they are globalist. They don't care about the United States. They don't care about England. They don't care about Australia. They don't care about any country.